All right, let's go back to the topic that we were talking about.
Yeah, well, here I have an immediate challenge on the topic that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Based on what we're doing right now. You said earlier that vulnerability without expectation
Yes.
is the topic or the idea that
We're talking about.
vulnerability without expectation, which I said, or it's like agendaless connection.
Yes.
Before we dive into that, here's an interesting thing about podcasting.
Yeah.
There's an obvious agenda. There's an obvious expectation for anyone that has set this up. How are you anticipating to have authentic, vulnerable conversations
Yes.
that aren't driven by some other expectation or motivation that would compromise the authenticity?
I would say,
what's the strategy?
yeah. The expectation of this is how I would define it. Coming into a moment and sharing what you're really experiencing and being willing and being courageous enough to share it. Like, I think that's it. Like, that's the gold, I guess I would say. If you're coming in there and you're feeling something, but you're not brave enough to share it in that moment or willing, it's not even bravery. It's like, are you willing? Because this could be scary. This could be real. This could be, if I share this can alter everything I'm dealing with.
Well, think about it for a second. 30 minutes ago, we're having the same conversation, but we're sitting at a counter. We're drinking tequila and soda,
Yep.
having fun as bros.
Yep. Cheers.
All of a sudden, cheers. All of a sudden, you put some headphones on and mics, cameras. What's the difference? And what I would say is,
I would say the difference
how
right
do
now.
you capture what was happening over here on this without the cameras and the mics distracting from that?
Yeah. Well, the key thing is, do you allow these things to distract you, or do you allow these things to capture the moment? So that goes to, I would say, the opportunity of the moment, like seizing what is being communicated. And there's always that moment where you're like, oh, I wish I kept that. I wish I wrote that down. Well, that's what this is. So it's not like letting these things that are in front of us and on our ears or being recorded take away from the moment. They're just there to capture the moment. And almost like you just have to let them go. But then you have to go around the cord, right? Like, oh, here's the cord. Let me get around it for a second. But I think it's realizing part of our job that we're seeking in this moment is letting people into the story. So are you willing to let this be on camera? Are you willing not to let things be challenged by, what if somebody sees me in this conversation? What if somebody has questions or are going to question what I say? And can I just be open and honest? That's tough. It's tough just to be open and just dialogue. And how long, let me just put it this way, how long has it taken us to have this conversation in front of a camera, on a mic?
A long time. Well, several months.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that in order to do this with that premise, you have to already believe that there's something inherently good about vulnerability. In other words, that you're just trusting that if we just are real, it'll be good and it'll be helpful, as opposed to scripted, where you can heavily edit and stylize everything, Photoshop every word. But I think you have to already believe, no. There's something good about the raw authenticity.
Yep.
That will be beneficial to people to listen, even if it's sort of scary for us to just jump into without a script.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you're actually going to do it. Otherwise, it's too scary.
Yeah. And I wonder, too, maybe the lack of script helps us to dive into it. Or if we
forces us to dive into it.
But yet, at the same time, I think if we had some type of understanding of, hey, today we're going to talk about this. Like, what happened for us was we were talking, we were like, man, this is good conversation. We should get this on camera. We should get this recorded. So we do have an agenda of saying, let's talk about this subject. But at the same time, our agenda isn't to say this needs to be perfect or something amazing. It's more of let's start to talk about this frame of how do we go into relationship? How do we break into these moments and have something that is worthy to be said? And how can we go into even a relationship of like, we're talking about going into a man and a woman trying to pursue what does this look like in a relationship, right? And here we are in our age, right? Later 30s, dating, and how do we do that, right? What does that look like? And I think for some people, it's like, yeah, you just go and find a girl, ask her out, hang out, and go for it. But that's not everyone. So some people have had victories and some people have scars. So what do we do with the scars and how do we overcome those, but yet be brave enough to move into this season where we've all been tainted at some sense or another? And I don't know about you, but I know a lot of friends that they've dated a lot and now they're in two like fields. I think one is they've dated a lot and they're tired and they've been like hurt and they're like, oh, I want to get out there, but I don't want to get out there. I should get out there. And then you put COVID on top of that, right? And in the COVIDness, like people have gained weight so they don't feel good about themselves, or they like feel okay about themselves, but they're socially awkward because they've been stuck in a home this whole time. Like, I don't know. What do you feel about that? Like, what's the tension you feel in this?
I think it's interesting in that it's the same sort of paradox or struggle with the first thing we were talking about. How can something be vulnerable and authentic without any type of expectation or agenda?
Yep.
In relationships or dating, it's especially with all the COVID things, that there's all these things that we want to ask, like, what's the best way to meet someone or date or court someone or pursue someone, et cetera, et cetera. And I think of it like, imagine you're a gardener and you got a bunch of plants. What's the best way to make them healthy and make them flourish? The answer is it depends on what the plant is. If it's a cactus, then you don't need to feed it that much. You're going to make that cactus healthy one way. If it's a daisy or fern or something, you're going to need a lot more attention. Human beings are so different and have so much variety to who they are that it really just depends. And so I think that given the pressure to be a single person and want to date someone or want to be married, I really think that you have to go into it with a desire to be vulnerable and authentic, which is what we just talked about, without any expectation that it'll become something bigger than what you want it to be, or romantic, if you will. And I think that a lot of that, what makes it scary is you just have to be real. You have to be vulnerable without knowing what kind of plant you're dealing with here, whether or not that what you have to offer is what they actually need. And there's no way of knowing when you first meet someone.
Yeah.
At all.
It goes to like, I like the picture I get is sales. If we go into sales and we try to I think the best, like with my coaching at least, how I find the best clients is if I'm a good fit for them and I'm assessing it and I'm asking them the questions and they're asking me questions. But our whole agenda is to say the way I am asking of like you as a client and the way that you're seeking results, do we match? And but let's take that back to a relationship. The reason why I say that is like if you get a no in that kind of conversation, like you're okay with it because at the end you realize we're not a match.
Yeah, well, and that's where chemistry comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's true in the plant world, and it's true in the coaching world, and it's true in the dating world. There's something that's either there as an inherent match, or it's not there.
Yep. So what do you do with that? How do you stand in that tension, and how do you like work in that and find something that could be good.
This might be a segue, or maybe not, but I think one of the answers is learn to embrace and accept awkwardness and rejection as part of the deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have that perfect fit either in client, relationships or in dating relationships. But in order to even experiment or explore that, you have to just go for it. And the overwhelming majority of the time is it's not a fit.
Yeah.
And to be okay with that and to be like not crippled by that or fearful of it that you just avoided altogether, I think is part of, to be honest, it's why a lot of people stay single, or a lot of people who need help don't even seek someone like yourself to coach them through it. Is what if there's no chemistry? What if I get rejected? What if it's not?
And that goes to perspective, right? Like something I think I've been connecting the dot to is when people say, I can't, or I can't have that. And sometimes what I've been challenging people with is the realization that you're not saying I can't have that. You're saying, no, I don't want that because that doesn't serve my overall goal and my purpose.
That's the expectation creeping in, isn't it?
Yeah, expectation and perspective. And I think if we can really dial in, what are we really doing this for? Why are we saying no? Why are we saying no in this moment? Because what we're really saying yes to is something that is waiting for us. And that's transformation. And that's something that or body-wise, that could be transformation. Relationship-wise, it could be something significant. But are we daring enough to risk heartbreak? Are we daring enough to even go out there and move through? Okay, I would even say this. Are we daring enough to mess up again? Because now we're older and we've messed up several times. Time's clicking or ticking. What do we do with that? And I think in those moments, there's something every time we step forward and every time we get another no, do we trust that there's going to be a yes soon? Can we just trust the journey that everything teaches us? Rather than I look at my story and I see a lot of mistakes I've made. And at first it was signs of, this happened several times and it took a lot of people to tell me this, to help me. But one of them was I did a life map, and I just laid out my whole life. And it was when I was pursuing my master's, and I was in the room with a couple pastors that were kind of they're doing good with their stuff. And I'm trying to become a pastor at that moment. And I just listed all these failures. And then afterwards, I was just sitting there in this funk. And they're like, how was this? And I said, honestly, after I shared this, it looks like I'm just going to fail. And I'm pretty defeated right now. And then one of the guys that was a pastor, he said, I took it completely different. And he was like, what I took was God said, I love you more than this. I love you more than this. I love you more than this.
Wow.
And so that was a powerful moment. But then fast forward, I went into ministry, had fun in it, did some amazing things, got to impact people around the world and be a part of a thing that was a global movement. And then got out of that and went back into health and wellness and fitness and just trying to find my place. And one thing didn't work out. So I went to another thing. And it looked good. It was something I wasn't even looking for, but I fit well. My giftings worked. It was growing, and then quickly just went off the table. And then it was okay, what's next? And then again, and then I found something, but this time I was I'm going to do it different again. And so I picked up a job, did some other jobs, did so many different things at the same time, and realized I think it's time for me to go after this. And once I really chose myself and I went towards myself and growing my own company, then I realized everything prepared me for this moment. And now I can have the ability to be courageous and go after it. And what's crazy is like, then all these lessons from everything I've learned in the past started to give me experience and credibility and permission to go after this now. And I wonder how much that's tied into relationship for us, how it prepares us and qualifies us to be ready for a relationship. Because now we're not going into it blindly. Like when I first started in ministry, I thought I knew everything. And I thought I had the gifting to step into those things. But thank God I had people walking with me that were older than me and saw my, drive and said, like, it's okay. We want you to focus on this. Those things that, yes, there's a need there, but it's okay that there's a need there. Like God filled that. And that was like so powerful. But now, like, stepping into now, like we have all these lessons. But if we go back and say, wow, look at who we were. And then that was like 10 years ago. Now look at where I am. I can say, holy crap. Mm-hmm. I've learned so much.
So let me ask you something. Because you said in ministry, you experienced failure and you struggled through that, and you had felt like you'd given up on that, and then you found something different, and it sounds like you had a perspective change of some kind that allowed you in some way to view that failure differently, and almost leverage it to something greater or different, or you might even say something more in tune to how God created you specifically. No, not a pastor, but yes, pour into people, develop people, grow people, disciple people. My question is, can you recall what that perspective change was that enabled you to overcome the failure and stop viewing it as, to back up a second, Edison famously failed, quote unquote, 1,000+ times creating or inventing the light bulb before he found how to make it work. And each one of those got him closer. But for you, what was the perspective change that enabled you to not be so crippled by failure and to, like many people do, just give up and get out of ministry, get out of helping people and, do something else?
Yeah.
What changed?
I think two things. But with Edison, one thing I really love, real quick, to go back to that, is he came home and he talked with his wife, and his wife actually helped him with reframing.
Outside help.
Yeah. So I think one, having a counselor with you, talking to you, helping you connect dots. That's always helping me. Like, for me, that's being seen in the journey. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important for me. The other one is just acknowledging stepping out takes risk. Stepping out is vulnerable. And I don't think a lot of times I honor the vulnerability of like doing things without being taught it, and being okay with like, if I fail, I'm learning, rather than feeling if I fail, I'm bad or I'm unworthy.
If you fail, you're learning, rather than if you fail, I'm bad, I'm guilty, I messed up.
Yeah.
That's the perspective change.
Yeah. So it's shame versus opportunity.
Wow.
I think that's the key right there, right? Is sometimes if we fail, we see that as like unworthiness. But rather it's what qualifies you for what's coming.
I've got a scripture for you. James 1 says, "Consider it joy whenever you endure various trials, knowing that it's producing perseverance, and that perseverance has to finish its work so you can be complete and lacking nothing." But it's this idea that the trial or the failure or the difficult thing that you think is bad, this is the perspective change. Consider it joy. Why? It's producing something. It's doing something productive in your life in some way that you can't understand. Part of the vision, the mission statement of living Zoe is, it's not just faith, it's fitness. And I know in the physical world, I'm a marathon runner, a young marathon runner. I don't have a lot of experience, but I do know that in the physical world, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way you build muscle is actually by working out to a point that stretches you to a point where you actually tear down muscle, you actually break down muscle. And in the process of muscle building, that's necessary for growth, is to actually break down muscle to the point where you can go no more. You're out of your comfort zone.
And tearing to build.
And it builds after that. And so the physical world mirrors this principle of the trial is producing something greater. Mm-hmm. And it's believing, and I think this is where faith might come in, believing that it's doing something good is the only way we can get through it. Otherwise, we're like, why? Yeah. Why all the suffering?
Well, and I think you discover faith. Faith is, how do you say it? Something like faith is action, belief in action. And so it's like it's action discovering belief. And so it's like there's movement for you to discover. So I think the myth out there is like everyone has faith. But what is it? Is it faith that there's no God? Is there faith that there is God? There's a transaction that happens there. So
that's the scary, vulnerable part right there with no expectation, is you're leaping into that place.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. That's where we should be. And I think what people have hard times with is going one side or the other. And can we just be bold enough just to go for it? And can we be open enough to say, this is where I'm at? And I think that's the journey of life, right? Can we just be open to just be us? And I think I've struggled with that growing up. I've struggled just being authentic. Because like growing up, I was like one of the smallest guys in school. Mm-hmm. And so growing up, at first, it was like, insecurity and trying to fit in rather than find my uniqueness and just be simply me. And that's all I needed to be. And if I was just me, I can impact people. And that's what I discovered along the way, right? I don't have to care. I just have to be me. And as I strive to be me more, there's less I have to do and more opportunity that comes. And then my perspective is something that's completely different and gives opportunity for people to discover their permission to be them.
Wow. That's powerful. I have a question for you. What would you say to the person who's hearing this and is like, I want that. I get that. Yes, be authentic, be yourself, just be you. But they're like, no, every single time I've been in that position of vulnerability, I've gotten burned, I've gotten hurt, someone's broken trust with me, and no, I don't even see the value. I get it. Yes, I'm watching and listening. It's attractive, and I wish I could be that, but it's not worth it. How do you have that type of faith or what would you say to that person who's hearing this and feeling like that is almost stupid to do that? It's like the idea of vulnerability isn't even an attractive goal because it just means getting hurt again. And what would you say to someone to help them overcome that?
Two parts. I think that I'm going to say the hardest thing first. Sometimes I don't. I go for the being seen first, but I want to hit the jugular real quick.
Okay.
It starts with me. I'm the one in the story that is the equation that's allowing things or causing things. So if I realize that, then that helps me, because I guess for me this is the journey for me. I ran from pain. I went to things that I shouldn't have gone to. I lied, stole, did everything that isn't healthy for a person to do. And all that did was cause more destruction than anything. And I think once I realized I'm the vehicle that's continuing this trauma, and I am the vehicle that's continuing this destruction, and maybe there's more to life than this. How do I get out of that? Was the first thing, right? How do I make the step? And first, like, I was thankful that, not every, so here's the kicker. I think there's different journeys for different people. Sometimes it's just hearing this story and they can be inspired to make the change. And I'll talk about what it looks like to make the change. Sometimes they just need to hear the story, or they have to be so in the story themselves that they realize that's me. And then they realize that they can make the choice to change it. Or they're just, they have to go through it and learn the lesson and be in the lesson to realize maybe they heard this and they're stuck in it, right, later. So I think part of that was my journey, right? And I think I had people that were willing to speak truth to me, to love me. And in that, for so long, I didn't receive the love from the people that are around me. I was so caught in the, that's okay. I was so caught in the story that made me so I wasn't able to see who was there, who was loving me. So that was part of it. But I think the biggest thing that started to change for me was owning my story, owning what's happening. So that's the hard part. So it's like, if the common equation keeps happening, it's probably ourselves, number one, right? So own that, work on that is key. What are you going to do to like reframe your life or put things in your life that challenges you to grow? Then you got to ask the question, are the relationships in my life right now life-giving or life-sucking? Number one. Are they pulling on me, or are they life-giving? Second, am I full or depleted? Are the things I'm doing with my food and exercise, do I even have that? Is that even an equation? And then, am I setting goals or am I not? Am I living for the weekend or am I living for the week? There's so many things that have to be questioned in it. But the good news is if you start to tweak things, things change. And the crazier thing is, like, it doesn't happen overnight, but it takes time, right? So I was decently known in my city that I grew up in for fitness at the time. And I was not pursuing education. I was kind of stuck, getting burnt out. But people knew me as like, oh, that's Jeremy. He's the trainer, right? So my identity was being found in that. But I knew there's more, but I knew that was part of my gifting. So then when I moved to go back to school, I had to rewrite everything. I had friends, I had community, I had all this stuff, but then I chose to leave all that and start anew. And when I started anew, I realized, man, I'm really missing out. Like, I can go see my friends, but I have to restart everything over here. And what does that look like? I have to reinvent myself in some ways. And can I trust that I'm going to build the same kind of community? And what I found is I built better community. And I built community that was thriving. But then I found myself getting stuck into a position again where it was about, I was still settling. And I think when I was in my master's, there's a moment where a professor challenged me. And he asked everyone to step up to excellence. And I never had that before. I had it a couple times where I had people believe in me, but not like hold me to it. And like I had dyslexia, ADHD. So I've always been given the somewhat a get out of free jail card. And like given more time on tests, like, oh, it's okay, that kind of stuff. And what I had to realize was this teacher wasn't allowing that. And he said, like, no, you got to show up.
Wow.
And if you don't, like, your grade's going to reflect it. And I was like, dang. And then I got a D in the class. And that class was an elective for me. And I just wanted to know how to preach and speak with oral clarity. So I was like going through the class and got the D. So now I can't even graduate because I had to get a 3.0 to graduate. And before that, School was never about the grade for me. It was about just like learning and like getting to connect with people around me and just find community, learn, grow, just become. But now there's a grade that was attached to it. So I went from one degree, MDiv, to MA. And so MDiv, I think you could get away with like a 2.4 or 2.6 at the time. And then now I left the MDiv, which was like 96 units, to go towards a 68 unit master's.
Fuller or Talbot?
Talbot,
yeah.
So moving to that, like that means your grade average has to go higher. So then I had to start performing. But what I found out was I can do it. But I never allowed myself to do that before. Because in high school, junior high, I was doing drugs. So that was never a priority. I never tested myself earlier. So I had to test myself then. And that was really hard. I had to learn. I had to go, okay, I messed up. How do I overcome this? Work harder. Okay, I work harder. Now, how do I learn from that? What are the lessons that are there for me? And I think this is a long-winded conversation to your question, but something that changed for me was my uncle said something to me, and he said that, the greatest people, they wake up about 4 or 5 in the morning. They start their day, they get their exercise done, they get their quiet time done, they read things to help motivate them and grow them. And then they start their day around 7 or 8. And I was like getting up really quick and going to school, maybe 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So he was sharing like your momentum is far less than so many other people. So if you start your day earlier and start your momentum earlier, what's going to happen over time is going to be greater than those that don't. And I look at his life, and he's crazy successful. And he's been practicing that for 50 years.
Wow.
So hearing that and knowing that in that moment is like, wow. And at the time, that was like 40 years into the business for him.
It sounds like that circles back to the first point you made, which is how do you get out of that from being that person that looks at being your authentic, real, vulnerable self with dread and fear to overcoming that? You said, number one, own it, which is part of this, like having the morning routine discipline. That's part of owning your story. And then the second thing you said was surrounding yourself with healthy influences, weeding out unhealthy influences. Community is important.
Yeah.
And I think that part of owning it sounds like, is recognizing and believing that you have the power to change. That there's a large amount of people that I think if you were to ask them, they recognize their pattern. I smoke every day, or I'm overweight. I eat all the same. And you ask them, well, do you believe it's possible to change? And they're honest. They would actually say, no. Like, people are who they are, and that's just who I am. And you talk about your identity being wrapped up in one thing and needing it to change into something different. You're not just a fitness trainer. That's not your thing. Can you describe from an identity standpoint? Was there an awareness of if you're not a fitness trainer only, what did you ground or root your identity in that enabled you to kind of experience this freedom to explore and experiment and find who you really are?
Yeah. I would say I had to attach to things and then detach from things. And I think that's what helped me the most. And then, journeying through it, I don't know when it happened. I think I started to realize when you attach yourself to something, you carry a lot more responsibility and stress because you start to look for what other people's opinions are rather than like, where are you at? And can you just be okay with where you're at? So part of it was just accountability. I had an accountability buddy, and we just like walk life with each other. And we got to the place where we're so sick of the things that were inside of us. And we had to ask the question, can we just be loved with this? what if we don't change? Can we just be okay with ourselves first? And that was a big moment because it goes from white knuckle change to like real change, right? White knuckle change is like trying to make it happen. And then like real change is like being loved in your crap and just saying, I love you for who you are, not for what you can do. And I think that was like a pivotal moment in my journey. And then another one was like just sometimes we just have to step out and do stuff and realize like we can change a life. And that was one. The other one was just being okay that I have a different perspective than others and being okay with that too. And realizing sometimes people are projecting stuff on you more than you realize. As their expectation, their stuff that they're putting on you. And sometimes they don't even know or are aware that they're putting this title. They're putting this definition of the title on you. And you're like, dang, your stuff comes with stuff. and there's like, that's rough. You know, like what if you just were free just to give yourself grace? So sometimes it's giving grace to others so that you can receive grace for yourself. And then I think something that's always helpful is like knowing sometimes when you can help somebody, it's because you're going through it yourself. If you're catching something, most of the time it's because you're dealing with it yourself. So if you can just own that and reflect on that and not see yourself above them, but use it as a gift to remind you or encourage them and inspire them. I think that's another tweak in it.
I think our podcast just merged. My premise is in my Every Scar podcast is exactly that. It comes from a quote from a song by Thrice is my favorite band. They're actually from Irvine, California. The song lyric in the movie in the song 4 Miles goes like this. It says, "Every scar is a bridge to someone's broken heart, and there's no greater love than the one that shed his blood for his friends." And packed into that lyric, this powerful lyric that every scar is a bridge to someone's broken heart, is exactly what you just outlined, which is namely that in some strange transcendent way, our pain, our wounds, when we heal from them, and we establish the strength and courage to be vulnerable about them, what actually happens, far from our worst fears coming true of everybody rejecting us for sharing something ugly or painful about our past, it connects to people's pain, and all of a sudden they feel validated and they open up, and that's every scar is a bridge to someone's broken heart. And it's amazing how what could be the worst possible thing that you went through that you could never possibly imagine opening up or sharing or acknowledging to anyone is actually the very vehicle that allows you to help and comfort other people who are going through that. Because you know what it's like to be in their shoes. You have an intimate awareness and I would say compassion for
it's a compassion,
what they're going through,
empathy, and I'd add one more word. I think it's capacity. You want to define that? Yeah, I think sometimes when people share a journey and you've had a similar one, you carry the ability to know what it was like to move through it. And sometimes that's the capacity, that's the denseness of life. And when some people haven't lived life, they're like surface. But the ones that have lived life, they've experienced. And when you connect to those people, you're hitting a different wavelength with them because it's deep. And it's like, no, you've lived life.
That's right.
And I get it. And I see you. And we relate because we've done it. Right? And it could be so many different levels, but it's like you've gone through the shit and you got out.
Yeah.
And I think that's why some people in war connect over that, because they've experienced certain things and they've gotten past it. Now, how do we help each other to keep on going? Right? So you look at war times, I think what's so interesting is during war times, men withdrew. So then sons never really had their fathers. So sons were actually fatherless more than they realized. So then they chased, seeking father's approval with work, with other stuff, with women. And now we have these cycles playing out. And now were those children, the children's children of that. And some were the children, but some are children's children. And now we have the children's 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 children.
Generational trauma.
Yeah. And it's playing out. We're taught cycles. So how do we even break that? How can we become aware of that? How can we grow to a place where we can actually like have more than what our parents have had? And I think here's the kicker, and here's the beauty. This is something I learned, was we're meant to stand on our forefathers' shoulders and go beyond. Are we willing to learn from their victories and their tragedies? And yet, no, not be defined by their limitations or what they've given us, but to say, here's a launching pad. And I think people get labeled really quick by saying you're less than, you're not enough, rather than go for it. Like for you, you are a marathon runner. You train for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go for it, right? You got a lot of walls that you have to pass during that. Like share that. Like I think that's running a marathon is not easy. But what's your journey? How do you prepare so you're successful at that?
1 mile at a time, first of all. The idea that you kind of wake up one day and like, today I'm going to run 26.2 miles is a myth. No one has ever done that. It is one slow act of obedience and discipline one day after another. And, I love Nike's slogan, just do it. One of the best marketing slogans of all time. It's true. Sometimes you just have to do it. But I've learned with life and marathon training, it's not just do it, it's do it again and again and again, like repetitive obedience, habitual discipline creates habits that create character, where all of a sudden you're not just someone that runs a lot, you're a runner. In a healthy way, it's a part of your identity, not in some all-encompassing, God replacement way, but that it's something that is so ingrained in what you do and how you live your life that it is a part of your character. And integrity can be this way, honesty can be this way, loyalty, and unfortunately so can bad things, being someone who's a liar or a cheat, or a drug user. Whatever we do repeatedly will become a habit that eventually will become part of our character. And so running has taught me that much, is that the disciplines that you sow into your life will bear fruit, either for good or for bad, and therefore you need to choose wisely which ones you put in for health.
I sit with your story really quick, and something that was just like really hitting me was, what takes us the farthest in that training? Do we focus on the form? Do we focus on our awareness of who we are in the moment? Are we focusing on our body position over as we run? Are we letting ourselves just go because we're exhausted? Or do we challenge ourselves to stay in the correct posture and trust that, right? Or do we just like focus on, I just got to get past this wall? And sometimes our form gets off and we need to correct, and then we got to keep going. Sometimes we have this like outer body experience where we're moving away from what we should be focusing on, and we drift, right? Sometimes it's euphoric, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's needed, but we have to check back in with ourselves and say, are we in form? And I think that's so necessary. Are we checking in with our form? Are we checking in with who we need to be to win the race? Or are we just going for it and saying, I don't trust myself. I don't trust my training. I don't trust everything I've done. Like, do you find yourself, have you thought of those things? Like, do you focus on your form? Because if you're not focusing on, I'm not saying this is you, but if you're not focusing on your form, you're going to have injury over time. If it's not one race, it'll be the third race, but it will come because you're not running properly. And I think that's the real thing, is like, what's my long-term goal in this?
Yeah. And I think that what's interesting is, and this is a paradox that we definitely will not be able to explain or have a satisfactory sense of peace about, but the reality is form does matter. Yes. However, think about how this applies to like moral laws. Being a good person matters. You should definitely try to, love your neighbor, be kind, etc. But the reality, just like in the moral realm, in the physical realm, at least with me as a marathon runner, I always fall short. There's runs where my form is totally off. There's days where my discipline is non-existent. And I think that there is this principle in marathon running that is true.
Let me ask you a question, because this is what I'm curious. Curious for you in this. Are you paying attention to yourself in those moments? Or are you just trying to get through the run?
No. So what I would say is, because I know I can guarantee you that my form will not be perfect, my goal would be to fix my mind on things that are different than the physical realm altogether. That there is a reality. My marathon training verse is Hebrews 12:1, which says, "We're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and therefore we should throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles." And then it says, "Run the race set before you with perseverance, fixing your eyes on Jesus Christ, the author and perfecter of your faith." And in this metaphysical principle of focus, which is sometimes called dissociation, or shifting your attention away from something physical or painful, like, for example, my form or lack thereof, or the pain that I'm going through and what my body is doing, which is important to check into, onto something greater than and more glorious than the physical realm, which is Jesus. I have discovered when in my long runs, I actually literally put this into practice. My body is breaking down. I want to pass out, vomit on the side of the road. And I've discovered a mental exercise of taking that verse at face value. It says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus Christ, the author and perfecter of your faith." And it says, "Who, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God." This picture of like, what was the motivation for going through the suffering and the cross and the humiliation, the vulnerability that were like, what's the point? And he believed in that there was a joy that was going to produce. And I think that for me, the mindset of doing the very best I can to get my discipline to be as on point with my form and my mechanics as possible, and then this is the hardest part, recognizing in some mysterious way that my power or God's power is actually made perfect in my weakness, and that there's going to come a point where my human capacity has given out. I can't run any further. I want to give out, and that his power is going to kick in that moment of surrender. Is my victory strategy is that I'm going to marathon runners like calling it hitting the wall. I've planned and expected to hit the wall as part of my training strategy. And that's where I'm like, God, you got to come in that moment, because my physical training has exhausted itself. And it's something that like our podcast conversation earlier about how do you plan spontaneity or have an agenda to be authentic. It almost sounds like a paradox, but it is a paradox in that it's not contradictory. It's just confusing to understand how there is an element of surrender where our human limitations just hit the wall, and that we recognize that we can't be perfect. Our form can't be as great as we want it to be. We're going to fall short. And it's by God's grace that we get through the rest, that he promises to step in and give us the power to get through. And I think that's where the faith component comes in, is right. Mm-hmm. I know, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Psalm 73 is this, I'm going to wear out, but he is forever, and he will empower me. And it's something that it's very difficult to practice, but I have learned either the hard way by just simply burning out and realizing that like I'm out of energy and that I need him, or through just planning it in that, namely, I will break down at one point, and I'm going to need his strength to get through.
Yeah. So I think I want to highlight something, because for maybe, I think of this, and I think of some people that don't connect the dots to that, right? Or don't connect the dots to the faith of that, or understanding the faith of that. And I wonder, part of this journey, I think we're all on, and here's the faith component, right? You can attach to God in those moments because before those moments, you saw him in other moments. And you saw him somebody that you can trust. Lessons you've learned in life gave you the know-how and the ability to say, in this moment that I'm ready to give up, I realize his truth and my experience with him before gave me the ability to rise in those moments. So if I go to him now, I'm able to be present and rise again. And I can stand in this discomfort for the sake of what's coming and the meaning of what he's done for me and the lessons I've learned from obeying that and how much life that's given me. So if I endure this yet again, this pain, this discomfort, I may have something greater. And I think that goes to like the purpose of who God is and what he's done for us and what he's doing for us is to say, every time I embrace his truth, more comes. Deeper knowledge or more connection.
More muscle.
More capacity. Things don't shock us or hit us the same, right? It lessens things, like everything. And I think sometimes we need that moment to catch those little things, because like when you say that in that moment, it's so easy for us to disconnect from your experience, because what your journey carries that's so unique is you had all these moments where God has shown up. But how he's shown up has been through tragedy. How he's shown up has been almost to death. And like, yet you see him because you're still alive. And like, you've gone through stuff. And so he's taught you lessons along the way. So it's almost like like everything you've gone through almost correlates again back into your running. Where it's like, I hit walls. Walls could be death. Walls could be, and I like that metaphor, because sometimes we have to die from the old person so we can become who we're supposed to be. And I think sometimes when we have scars, like your podcast, scars can trigger us to say that's unsafe. But yet if we go and try it again, there's life and excitement on the other side. I've almost died a couple times surfing, and I'm so thankful that I kept doing it after, because that's when I've had moments. Like there's this one wave I can still remember at Trussell's, and it was actually at Cotton's at the time, so it's like close to Trussell's in San Clemente. It was a big day, and I just caught this ride, and it was like so long, huge, and the rush was so euphoric that literally when I got off the wave, this laughter came out of me out of nowhere. I've never experienced it before. Laughter just exploded out of me, right? And I was just like laughing, and it just felt so incredible. And I just was like basking in it for a second. But that was after so many times of crashing, so many times of almost dying, like almost giving up on life. And like going, well, I guess this is it. Like I don't know what side's up. One time I hit the bottom instead of hit the top. And I was like, I gotta get there. Like, and it's just like one more, I don't know, boom, I hit the bottom. And I'm like, maybe there's still hope and I can jump off the bottom. And I was able to get out. But like, talk about like those moments can hold you back and cripple you. Or do you let peace come into those moments and say, I'm okay? And like surfing for me teaches me that, humbles me all the time to say, if I'm scared, I'm missing out. If I embrace and trust and just go for it, I experience so much more. And I think like how neat your story carries a similar reflection, and that is when you run and you hit those walls, it reminds you these walls will never hold you back. But yet they're preparing you for so much more. And how much does a scar stay strong? But how do you break up a scar? You have to massage the crap out of it. You have to break it up. or else it will always be there. It will never leave you unless you break it up. So your running is retraining your neural pathways to say, I'm never going to be held back by these things in my past. But yet, I'm going to let these things be vehicles for me to become who I'm supposed to be. And I think that goes back to vulnerability. And it goes back to our purpose of this. Can that just simply be a practice? And can we let that really be the tool that actually allows us to see there's more to life? And that there's risk, and that their risk is good. And when we do it, we find that there's so much more waiting for us. And yet, beyond what's waiting for us, I think what the special thing is we actually get to see that there's a person waiting for us if it's love. And they get to see us, and we get to journey life together. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's that dream that we've always wanted to achieve. But yet, we settled for a little bit less. What if you achieved that? What would life look like? How many lives could you touch because of your own journey? And what could come from that? What could be waiting for us on the other side? And that's what excites me, is this tension that we face. Yet we're all in it. And yet, like, I might be one place, you might be another place, but are we willing to allow our stories to inspire and remind it's time to show up? It's time to go for it. And how do we have the right people in our life that ignites that? Or do we keep having these same people stuck in our lives that keep us in these patterns, that never let us grow, that always keeps us in a place that we settle for less? So how do we get out? We have to shift. How do we get out? We pursue the uncomfortability. How do we get out? We clean up our food. How do we get out? We discipline our body. How do we get out? We go seek help. How do we get out? Go to a different group of people. How do you get out? Be with others that are running the race. How do we get out? Change your ways. How do you get out? Change your morning. How do you get out? Change your night. How do you get out? Maybe it's change your paradigm. Fill yourself with new things. Listen to podcasts. Listen to things that will challenge your belief. If you're so confident in your belief, do you really believe it? Will you test it? If you test it, what's going to come? Truth. And I think that's a good place. I don't know about you. What do you think?
I think that the challenge is that we need a reference point of possibility that is, big word here, ready? Actualizable. A reference point of possibility that is actualizable. I've definitely never said that sentence before. So something that, an example, a model of that type of stepping out in faith and risking and all of that we can both see and grasp and understand. And then the actualizable part is believe that we can actually do that too.
Yeah.
And this is where
maybe that's a coach.
Apart from Jesus, like he was fully human in every way. He got hungry. He got tired. He needed to sleep. The scripture says that he was like us in every way except without sin, and therefore he's not unable to empathize, to sympathize with how we feel. Like he totally gets it. And at the same time, he was 100% God. He was a unique individual that, took all of this, the sin and the shame and the brokenness that we had on himself on the cross, and offers this sort of like, listen, life is hard. And I'm not saying it because I created everything. I'm saying it because I lived it. I bled for it. And he is the tangible example. He's the only example that we can look at, okay, he did it. He was vulnerable. And what is a more vulnerable posture than hanging naked and exposed and humiliated with blood dripping down your neck in front of a public display, with his arms open on a cross? Nothing is more vulnerable than that. And he's holding his arms out there just like, I'm enduring this. I'm showing you that I'm going to step out in faith and trust the Father. And I think that there is this picture of looking at like, well, why did he do it? And to go back to the verse, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated now at the right hand of the throne of God. And I think that for people that would be listening that either are faith-based or have no idea about anything, spiritual, they just have been shut off to that, without a transcendent anchor of why would we be vulnerable? I mean, just to get, more muscle, or just to feel better, or to be a better person, that's great. But I think that Jesus is this answer of there is no one like, he is a unique individual in that he offers the solution, namely he bridges the gap between us and God, the transcendent and the created. And I think that there's a verse that says that he went before us, setting an example, so that we may follow in his footsteps. That's in 1 Peter. And there is this picture, we're never going to be like him. We're always going to fall short. We're never going to be perfect. It is that we're always going to hit the wall. But that what the reality is that Jesus himself had to entrust himself to the one who judges justly. I mean, he even had to have faith, like, God, you better raise me from the grave in 3 days, because I don't know what I'm doing to die 3 days. He even questioned this in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's like, take this cup from me if it's not your will, Father, but if it is your will, nevertheless, may your will be done. And the belief that the confidence that we're going to step out in faith, and it will involve suffering, it will involve rejection, it will involve, but think about this, in faith, in dating, in business, in finance, in the physical realm, every endeavor that involves that will involve potential failure, potential hurt, potential harm. And the joy that's set before us is not merely growth, it's relationship with our Creator. And that's something that only Jesus provides. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Too much for one podcast, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think what you shared is, what's so good about it is this. I was just, as you're reflecting, I was thinking about the man that ran the 4-minute mile, right? The first guy.
I can't pronounce his name, Kipchoge Ilioid.
Yeah, I
he's insane. He's awesome.
I don't even know. But the thing that stuck out to me was, before that man ran it, people said, you will die if you run 4 minutes, a 4-minute mile. Mm. And yet, he defied that in that moment. And what did that do? That actually started other people along the journey that they did it, and they did it within a year. I think 4 other people within that next year broke 4 minutes. I think something like that. I'm not perfect. I don't really know, but something like that. And it just reminds me that sometimes what it took to step there, what Christ took to step into that moment, knowing what was beyond this, knowing the sake of it. If I don't do this, what's at stake? And I wonder, I'm going a different way real quick, but I wonder what's at stake for us tonight. What's at stake? What are we sacrificing if we don't really give it our all? And what if we gave it our all? What if we planned for that? What if we really stood in a place where we were so present for significance? What if we realized that our life really mattered? What if we realized how we smiled, how we showed care, how we were thoughtful, how we were generous? What if we planned everything about us, our finances, to be in a place where we have that capacity to compound that daily? Now here's the kicker. What if we compounded that? What if we trained that? What if we established that? And then it became a momentum. and this is just who you are. And then you practiced it more and more and more and more and established more and more and more. What would you be like? You know, I think something incredible.
I think, yeah, any person of any walk with any experience whatsoever in trial and error and doing anything successful would agree that if you were to do that, at the very least, you would be skilled, because the failure, an inevitable failure, a struggle along the way would teach so many different things that regardless of what you believe about how it came about and whether or not it was God or something else, the universe or evolution, that pattern of, to go back to, don't just do it again and again and again, and then step out and trust that something will be produced, something good will come from this, I think is demonstrated in the material world in the way that things grow. Children learn this way in school. Teachers definitely believe in this principle, you know, test kids a lot and give them the same math problems over and over again, you know, and eventually they'll understand arithmetic. It's true for podcasting. It's true for vulnerability, and true for faith, true for love, true for these transcendent virtues that are not as tangible as some of these other things. I think so.
Yeah. And I think so too. I think we're called to learn and grow and appreciate each other's journey and learn from each other. And like, I think you really discover who God is by really going for it and being okay if you're wrong, but yet like be put in those predicaments where you're such at the tension point that you discover. And I think that's necessary for that's necessary for business, that's necessary for a relationship. And then like, can you say, I'm sorry, I messed up? Can I learn from this? And I think that's what we're doing. And I say, yay, let's go for it, you know?
Let's go for it, man.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good place to stop on this.
Yeah, not bad for episode 1.
Yeah. So, hey, we did it. Episode 1.
Woo! Woo!